At my son's wedding, his mother-in-law said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's not a mother. That's a mistake in a dress." The bride laughed and clapped like a seal at feeding time. But my son didn't laugh. He stood up, called off the wedding in front of everyone, and did something that destroyed their family fortune the next day. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Now let me tell you how we got to this beautiful disaster, because honey, this story is about as sweet as revenge gets. 6 months before that glorious train wreck of a wedding, I was living my quiet little life in Cedar Falls, Iowa, thinking my biggest problem was whether to plant tulips or daffodils in my front garden. At 62, I'd perfected the art of being exactly what people expected. A widow living comfortably on my late husband's pension, driving my sensible Honda Civic, and making casseroles for church potlucks. What they didn't know was that my modest lifestyle was about as real as Jessica's future marriage was going to be. My son Tyler had been dating this Jessica Walsh for 8 months, and I'd met her exactly twice before she started planning their engagement, like she was organizing a military invasion. The first time was at Tyler's birthday dinner, where she spent the entire evening photographing her salad for something called Instagram, while asking me pointed questions about my financial security as I aged. Charming girl, really. The second meeting was when she brought her mother, Patricia Walsh, to get to know Tyler's family better. Patricia swept into my modest little house like she was touring a homeless shelter, making helpful suggestions about updating my decor and asking if I'd considered downsizing to something more manageable. Meanwhile, Jessica was in my kitchen opening cabinets and drawers like she was conducting a home inspection. "Mrs. Henderson," Patricia had said, settling into my late husband's recliner like she owned it. "We're just so thrilled that Tyler found someone who understands the importance of family support systems." She smiled that sharp little smile that wealthy women perfect by age 40. It's wonderful when older family members can contribute what they can, even if it's just emotional support. I nearly choked on my tea. Here I was, being patted on the head like a good little grandmother who might be useful for babysitting someday. If she only knew that I'd been watching my stock portfolio grow for the past 15 years, while she was probably spending her husband's money on whatever rich wives buy to fill their empty days. Tyler, bless his heart, was completely oblivious to the undercurrents. He was so in love, he couldn't see that Jessica looked at our family like we were a charity case she'd graciously adopted. And honestly, I was almost impressed by her performance. The girl had studied us like we were a science project, determined to figure out exactly how much we were worth and how she could best manage us. But here's what Jessica and her delightful mother didn't understand about small-town Iowa widows. We didn't survive the farm crisis, 3 recessions, and various family dramas by being stupid. We just let people think we are, because it's amazing what folks will say when they think you're harmless. The engagement announcement came in November, and with it, Jessica's first real mistake. She called me personally to share the wonderful news, and to let me know they'd already booked the Walsh family estate for a June wedding. Not asking if June worked for our side of the family, mind you, just informing me of the decision they'd made. "Mrs. Henderson," she gushed over the phone, "we're so excited to make Tyler a part of our family. The Walsh estate can accommodate 300 guests easily, and Mother has already spoken to the florist about the arrangements. Of course, we understand that your side of the family might be more modest in their expectations." I made appropriate grandmother noises while mentally calculating exactly how modest Jessica was about to discover my expectations could be. Because, you see, my dear soon-to-be daughter-in-law had made one crucial error in her research about Tyler's family background. She'd never asked about my maiden name. 3 weeks after Jessica's condescending phone call, I was sitting in my accountant's office reviewing my annual financial statements when I realized exactly how I was going to handle my future daughter-in-law's superior attitude. The numbers on the page were quite satisfying. 15 years of careful investing had turned my husband's modest life insurance payout into something considerably more substantial than anyone in Cedar Falls suspected. "Mrs. Henderson," my accountant Robert Chen said, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed my portfolio, "you've done remarkably well with these investments. Your current net worth has reached $3.8 million. I smiled and nodded like this was routine information, but inside I was doing a little victory dance. My late husband Jim had always said I had a good head for numbers, and apparently he'd been right. While everyone assumed I was living on his pension and Social Security, I'd been quietly building a fortune that would have made Jessica's mother soil her designer panties. The plan started forming in my mind like a beautiful, terrible flower blooming in spring. Tyler called that afternoon, voice bright with excitement. "Mom, Jessica's parents want to meet you properly before the wedding. They're planning a little dinner party next weekend. Nothing fancy, just immediate family." "How lovely," I said, already imagining what I'd wear to this nothing fancy dinner party. "Will it be at their home?" "Their estate, actually. Jessica says it's been in the family for generations. I guess they have quite a bit of property out in West Hills." Tyler paused. "Mom, I should probably mention that the Walshes are, well, they're pretty wealthy. Jessica's dad owns several businesses, and her mom comes from old money. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable or anything." Sweet boy. He was actually worried about me feeling out of place among rich people. If he only knew that I'd been getting investment advice from the same financial advisors who managed portfolios for half the wealthy families in Iowa. "I'm sure I'll be fine, dear," I assured him. "I'll just be myself." And that was exactly what I intended to do. The Walsh estate turned out to be one of those sprawling colonial mansions that screamed, "My great-grandfather made this fortune during the Industrial Revolution, and we've been coasting on it ever since." The circular driveway could have parked a dozen cars, and the front garden looked like something from a magazine spread about gracious living. I pulled up in my Honda Civic behind Tyler's modest Toyota, both of us looking like we'd gotten lost on the way to the servants' entrance. Jessica emerged from the front door wearing what I suspected was a $500 cocktail dress. Her smile so bright it could have powered the house's exterior lighting. "Mrs. Henderson," she called, air-kissing me like we were long-lost relatives. "Welcome to our family home. Mother and Daddy are so excited to meet you properly." The interior was all marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of furniture that costs more than most people's cars. Patricia Walsh glided down the grand staircase, wearing pearls that probably cost more than Tyler's annual salary, her husband Gordon trailing behind like a well-dressed shadow. "Margaret," Patricia said, taking my hands like she was blessing me with her touch. "How wonderful to finally have a proper visit. Jessica has told us so much about Tyler's family." I'll bet she had. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 20 people comfortably, though it was just the 6 of us around one end of their mahogany table. The conversation flowed like expensive wine, with Patricia and Gordon sharing stories about their recent trip to Europe, while Jessica hung on every word like they were recounting the secrets of the universe. "We just adore traveling," Patricia explained, cutting into what I suspected was very expensive steak. "Last year we did the Mediterranean, and this spring we're planning something special for Gordon's 60th birthday. Perhaps a private villa in Tuscany." "How lovely," I said, taking a sip of wine that probably cost more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a week. "Travel is so broadening." Jessica leaned forward eagerly. "Mrs. Henderson, Tyler mentioned you've never been outside the Midwest. We were thinking that after the wedding, you might enjoy visiting us when we take trips, as family." The condescension was so thick you could have cut it with the silver butter knife sitting beside my plate. Here they were, generously offering to include the poor little small-town grandmother in their glamorous lifestyle, probably expecting me to weep with gratitude at their charity. "That's very thoughtful," I replied, wondering how they'd react to learning that I'd been considering buying a vacation home in Florida with my investment returns. But the real show began when Gordon started talking about his business empire, 3 car dealerships, 2 restaurants, and what he called various other investments that were apparently doing quite well. He had that particular swagger that wealthy men get when they're showing off for someone they consider beneath them, explaining market strategies and business principles like he was teaching a kindergarten class. "The key to success," he informed me, gesturing with his wine glass, "is understanding that money makes money. Most people never figure that out. They work for wages their whole lives instead of making their capital work for them." I nodded thoughtfully, as if this was the first time I'd ever heard such wisdom, while mentally calculating that my portfolio had probably outperformed his various investments by at least 15% over the past 3 years. That's when Patricia delivered the line that sealed their fate. "Margaret, dear," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I hope you don't feel intimidated by all this wealth. We want you to know that we don't expect Tyler's side of the family to contribute equally to the wedding expenses. We understand your limitations." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop on their precious marble floors. The moment Patricia Walsh finished explaining my limitations to me, I felt something shift inside my chest. It was like a door slamming shut on the last 15 years of playing the humble widow, and another door opening onto something much more interesting. "How considerate of you," I said, setting down my wine glass with what I hoped was appropriate gratitude. I wouldn't want to overextend myself financially. Tyler looked mortified, and I almost felt sorry for him. The poor boy had no idea he was about to become collateral damage in what was shaping up to be the most educational experience the Walsh family had ever encountered. Jessica jumped in quickly, probably sensing the temperature drop in the room. "What Mother means is that we want everyone to be comfortable. We've already handled the major expenses, and we understand that different families have different circumstances." Different circumstances. Right. Gordon nodded sagely, like he was solving world peace. "The important thing is that we're all family now. Money shouldn't come between family members." Easy for him to say, considering he'd just spent 10 minutes bragging about his net worth while explaining basic investment principles to the simple widow, like I'd never heard of compound interest. I smiled and made appropriate murmurs of agreement while planning exactly how I was going to educate this charming family about assumptions and circumstances. Because you see, the Walsh family had just made the kind of mistake that rich people make when they've been rich for so long they forget that other people might have working brain cells. They'd assumed that modest meant poor and quiet meant stupid. After dinner, Patricia insisted on giving me the full tour of their family home, which was really just an opportunity to show off their art collection, their library full of leather-bound books that had probably never been opened, and their master bedroom suite that was larger than my entire downstairs. "The house has been in Gordon's family for 4 generations," she explained, running her fingers along the marble mantelpiece in their living room. "We've updated it considerably, of course, but we've maintained its historical character." "It's beautiful," I said honestly, because it really was. "You must feel very fortunate to have such a legacy." "Oh, we do," Jessica chimed in. "It's part of why Gordon and I are so committed to family traditions. We want Tyler to understand what it means to be part of something substantial, something that lasts." The message was clear. Tyler was marrying up, way up, and his little corn-fed family should be appropriately grateful for the elevation in social status. That's when I decided to start phase 1 of what I was already thinking of as Project Education. "Jessica, dear," I said, "I hope you won't think I'm being presumptuous, but I'd love to contribute something special to your wedding. Perhaps the rehearsal dinner? I know it's traditional for the groom's family to handle that." The 3 Walshes exchanged quick glances. Patricia's smile became just a touch more strained. "Margaret, that's so sweet of you to offer," she said carefully, "but the rehearsal dinner is already arranged. We thought it would be easier for us to handle all the details, given our experience with larger events." "Of course," I nodded. "Then perhaps I could handle the flowers, or the photography." Another exchange of glances. Gordon cleared his throat. "The thing is, Margaret, we've already contracted with the vendors we prefer to use. They're quite exclusive and probably more expensive than what you're used to working with in Cedar Falls." Ah, there it was again. The gentle but firm message that my small-town budget and small-town vendors weren't up to Walsh family standards. "I understand completely," I said. And I did. I understood that they wanted complete control over Tyler's wedding, so they could showcase their wealth and social position while keeping his family in the background like embarrassing relatives you had to invite, but hoped wouldn't embarrass you too much. What they didn't understand was that they'd just handed me the perfect opportunity to demonstrate exactly what Margaret Henderson was capable of when properly motivated. "Well then," I continued sweetly, "perhaps I could give Tyler and Jessica a wedding gift instead. Something that might help them start their new life together." Jessica's eyes lit up like a slot machine hitting jackpot. I could practically see her calculating how much the poor widow might be able to scrape together for a wedding gift. "That would be lovely, Mrs. Henderson," she said. Honestly, just having your blessing means the world to us. Your blessing. Like I was the village elder bestowing wisdom on the young couple instead of Tyler's mother who'd raised him alone for the past 12 years and deserved a little more respect than being patted on the head and told to stay in my lane. I smiled my most grandmotherly smile and made mental notes about guest lists and seating arrangements and exactly which reporters from the Cedar Falls Gazette might be interested in covering what was going to be the social event of the year. Because Jessica Walsh was about to learn that there's a big difference between being humble and being harmless. And Gordon Walsh was about to discover that some people understand making money work for them better than he'd ever imagined. But first, I had some research to do and some phone calls to make, starting with my investment advisor, who was going to be very surprised by my request to liquidate certain assets for what I was going to tell him was a family wedding gift. Phase 1 of Project Education was about to begin. The morning after my enlightening dinner with the Walsh family, I sat in my kitchen with my laptop and a fresh cup of coffee, beginning what I like to think of as my due diligence research. If Gordon and Patricia Walsh wanted to play the wealthy family superiority game, I figured I should understand exactly what kind of wealth I was dealing with. What I found was interesting. The Walsh family business empire, while impressive sounding, was built on some surprisingly shaky foundations. Gordon's 3 car dealerships were heavily leveraged, with 2 of them showing declining sales over the past 18 months. His restaurants had mixed reviews and what appeared to be significant debt. The various other investments he'd bragged about seemed to consist mainly of some rental properties and a small stake in a local shopping center that was losing tenants to the new mall outside town. The house, while beautiful, was mortgaged to roughly 70% of its current value. Patricia's old money appeared to be more like old debts. Her family's fortune had been significantly reduced by her father's gambling problems and her brother's series of failed business ventures. The Walsh family was wealthy, certainly wealthier than most people in our area, but they were what my financial advisor would call house rich and cash poor. They had assets, but they also had substantial monthly obligations and what appeared to be a lifestyle that required constant cash flow to maintain. This information made me smile in a way that probably wasn't very Christian, but I'd stopped worrying about being perfectly Christian around the time Patricia Walsh explained my limitations to me. I called Tyler that afternoon to check in about wedding plans and to fish for a little more information about his future in-laws. "Mom, I have to ask," Tyler said after we'd covered the basics about guest lists and menu choices. "You seemed a little quiet at dinner last night. Is everything okay? I know the Walshes can be overwhelming. Overwhelming. That was one way to put it. They seem like lovely people," I said carefully. "Very successful. Jessica's lucky to have grown up with such advantages." "Yeah, it's pretty intimidating sometimes," Tyler admitted. "Gordon's always talking about business deals and investment strategies. I feel like I need to take a finance class just to keep up with the conversation. Has Jessica talked about your plans after the wedding? Where you'll live? Career goals, that sort of thing?" Actually, Gordon offered me a position at one of his dealerships, sales manager, with the possibility of working my way up to part ownership eventually. "It's a huge opportunity, Mom. Way better than anything I could get with my current experience." I felt a chill run down my spine. Of course, Gordon had offered Tyler a job. Nothing like having your son-in-law financially dependent on you to ensure family loyalty. "That sounds generous," I said. "It is. Jessica says her dad really likes me, that he sees potential in me. The only thing is, the salary is mostly commission-based to start. And they want us to move closer to town so I can be available for weekend sales events and evening customer appointments." "Closer to town?" "Yeah, they found this apartment complex about 20 minutes from the dealership. Jessica says it's really nice, and since I'd be making more money eventually, we can afford the higher rent. Eventually. Always eventually. With people like the Walshes." Meanwhile, Tyler would be working for commission, living paycheck to paycheck, and completely dependent on Gordon's continued goodwill for his financial survival. "Have you signed anything yet?" I asked. "Not yet. Gordon wants to wait until after the wedding to make it official. He says it's bad luck to mix business with family celebrations. Or maybe Gordon wanted to make sure the wedding happened before he locked Tyler into an employment contract that would give him complete control over my son's future. That evening, I called my investment advisor with a very specific request. "Robert," I said, "I want to liquidate $500,000 from my portfolio. I know that's a significant chunk, but I have something important I want to do with it." There was a long pause. "Margaret, that's quite a substantial withdrawal. What did you have in mind? We've talked about being careful with large expenditures that might impact your long-term security." "Don't worry," I assured him. "This is an investment in my son's future. I want to give Tyler and his fiancée a wedding gift that will really set them up for success." What I didn't tell Robert was that the gift was going to set them up for success in ways that Jessica and her family would never see coming. Because while the Walsh family had been busy being condescending and superior, I'd been researching more than just their financial situation. I'd also been looking into Gordon's business practices, his competitors, and the local commercial real estate market. And I'd found something very, very interesting. The shopping center that Gordon owned a small stake in? It was about to be sold to a development company that wanted to tear it down and build a new medical complex. The sale would happen in approximately 8 months, and current investors stood to make about 300% return on their investments. But the development company was still looking for additional investors to help fund the purchase. Investors with ready cash and a willingness to move quickly. The kind of investors who might want to buy out smaller stakeholders like Gordon Walsh before the big payday arrived. I spent that entire evening on the phone with lawyers and business managers, putting together what was going to be Tyler's wedding gift and Jessica's education in the difference between appearing wealthy and actually being wealthy. Phase 2 of Project Education was about to get very interesting. 2 weeks before the wedding, I was sitting in my lawyer's office reviewing papers that would have made Gordon Walsh very, very nervous if he'd known they existed. But Gordon was too busy basking in his role as the generous father-in-law, giving Tyler his big break in the car business, to pay attention to what Tyler's humble, small-town mother might be doing with her time. "Everything is in order, Margaret," my attorney Sarah Mitchell said, sliding the documents across her desk. "The investment company is legally established, Tyler is listed as the primary beneficiary, and the initial funding is confirmed. Are you absolutely sure about this strategy?" I looked at the papers that would transfer my son from Gordon Walsh's employment trap into complete financial independence. And I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Sarah, I've spent 15 years watching my investments grow, while people assumed I was just another widow living on Social Security and casseroles. I think it's time Tyler learned that his mother isn't quite as helpless as everyone believes. The plan was beautifully simple. Instead of Tyler taking Gordon's commission-based job at the dealership, he would become the managing partner of Henderson Investment Properties, a company that would purchase Gordon's stake in the shopping center development project, along with several other strategic investments that I'd been monitoring for months. Tyler would start his married life not as Gordon's financially dependent employee, but as a businessman with enough capital to buy and sell Gordon Walsh's entire empire twice over. The wedding gift would be presented as a modest check that Tyler and Jessica could use for whatever they wanted. Maybe a down payment on a house, maybe some furniture, maybe a nice honeymoon. Nothing that would alarm the Walsh family or make them suspicious. What they wouldn't know until several months after the wedding was that the modest check would be backed by a business structure that would make Tyler independently wealthy within 2 years. But first, I had a rehearsal dinner to attend. The Walsh family had indeed handled all the details for the rehearsal dinner, which was being held at the country club where Patricia and Gordon were members. The guest list was small, just immediate family and the wedding party, which meant I would be spending the evening being graciously tolerated by people who considered me a charity case. I spent considerable time choosing my outfit for this particular performance. Nothing too expensive looking, nothing that would contradict my carefully maintained image as the modest widow, but something nice enough to show that I was making an effort to fit in with their standards. I settled on a simple navy dress from a nice department store, paired with my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one real piece of jewelry I wore regularly, because it looked appropriately sentimental and modestly valuable. What none of them knew was that I'd had those pearls appraised years ago, and they were worth approximately $15,000. My grandmother had excellent taste in jewelry, even if she'd lived modestly, just like her granddaughter. The country club was exactly what I'd expected, all polished wood and leather chairs, and the kind of understated elegance that screamed, "We have so much money we don't need to prove it." Patricia had reserved the private dining room, and the table was set with china that probably cost more than most people's cars. I arrived precisely on time, carrying a modest gift bag containing a picture frame I'd purchased specifically for this occasion. Nothing too expensive, nothing that would seem presumptuous, just something appropriate for the mother of the groom to give to the happy couple. "Margaret!" Jessica squealed. Jessica, air kissing me like we were the closest of friends. "You look lovely. That necklace is so vintage." Vintage. Right. "Thank you, dear," I said, handing her the gift bag. "Just a little something for you and Tyler to remember this special time." She opened it immediately, of course, and her smile became just a touch more forced when she saw the simple silver frame. It's very sweet," she said, clearly calculating how quickly she could hide it in a closet after the wedding. Tyler hugged me warmly, looking handsome in his new suit, probably the most expensive clothing he'd ever owned, courtesy of the Walsh family's insistence on appropriate formal wear for their country club standards. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered. "I know this has all been kind of overwhelming. I really appreciate you being so flexible about everything." Flexible. Another interesting word choice. Gordon and Patricia held court at their end of the table, regaling the group with stories about other weddings they'd attended at the club, other social events, other demonstrations of their established place in local society. They were in their element, surrounded by the kind of people who understood the importance of appearances and social position. The conversation flowed along predictably elegant lines until Patricia asked me about my plans after the wedding. "Margaret, now that Tyler will be starting his new position and moving closer to town, you'll probably be rattling around in that big house all by yourself," she said with concern that sounded almost genuine. "Have you thought about downsizing? There are some lovely senior living communities that might be perfect for someone in your situation." Senior living communities. For someone in my situation. I smiled sweetly and took a sip of wine that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "That's thoughtful of you to worry," I said. "Though I think I'll stay put for now. The house has so many memories and I'm quite comfortable there." "Of course," Gordon jumped in. "But as we get older, it's important to be practical about these things. Maintenance costs, property taxes, the burden of home ownership. Sometimes it makes more sense to let professionals handle those responsibilities." The burden of home ownership. Like I was some doddering old woman who couldn't figure out how to pay bills or call a repair service. "I'll certainly keep that in mind," I said, while mentally calculating that my house was paid off, worth approximately $180,000, and cost me less per month to maintain than most people spent on car payments. That's when Patricia delivered the line that confirmed everything I'd suspected about the Walsh family's opinion of Tyler's background. "You know," she said, reaching over to pat my hand like I was a confused child, "Jessica and Tyler want to have children fairly soon, and we'd love for their little ones to have a grandmother who can really contribute to their upbringing. Someone stable and appropriate." Appropriate. The word hung in the air like a challenge, and I felt my smile become sharp enough to cut glass. "I certainly hope I'll be able to contribute," I said quietly. What I didn't say was that my contribution to my future grandchildren's upbringing was going to include trust funds that would pay for their college educations, down payments on their first houses, and enough financial security to ensure they never had to depend on anyone's charity or condescension, including their other grandparents. But first, I had to get through this wedding without letting any of them see what was coming. The rehearsal dinner continued with toasts and well wishes and all the appropriate social rituals. I played my part perfectly, the grateful small-town mother-in-law, humble and appreciative of the Walsh family's gracious acceptance of Tyler into their social circle. What none of them could see was the envelope in my purse containing Tyler's real wedding gift, or the phone calls I'd be making the morning after the wedding to set in motion the chain of events that would change everything. Because tomorrow, Jessica Walsh would become Jessica Henderson, and she was about to discover exactly what that name was really worth. The morning of Tyler's wedding dawned bright and clear, which felt somehow inappropriate for what I knew was going to be one of the most dramatically satisfying days of my life. I'd spent the previous evening double-checking every detail of my plan while pressing my simple mother-of-the-groom dress, a modest blue ensemble that had cost exactly $89 at JCPenney and would help maintain my carefully crafted image for just a few more hours. What the Walsh family didn't know was that I'd spent the past week making phone calls that would fundamentally alter their financial landscape. But first, I had to survive this wedding without laughing out loud at the sheer audacity of people who thought they could patronize Margaret Henderson and get away with it. I arrived at the Walsh estate at 10 in the morning, as requested, carrying a wedding card containing what appeared to be a modest check for $5,000. Enough to seem generous from a small-town widow, but not so much as to raise suspicions about my actual financial capacity. What they couldn't see was the additional paperwork in my car that would transfer Tyler from Gordon's employee to Gordon's business competitor by Monday morning. The estate was buzzing with activity. Florists were arranging what appeared to be $50,000 worth of roses and lilies throughout the grounds. Caterers were setting up stations that could have fed half of Cedar Falls, and a string quartet was doing sound checks on the terrace where the ceremony would take place. Patricia was in her element, directing traffic like a general commanding troops, while Jessica glided around in a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, accepting compliments on her upcoming transformation from Walsh daughter to Walsh daughter-in-law. "Margaret," Patricia called, spotting me near the gift table. "How lovely that you're here early." Jessica specifically requested that Tyler's family feel included in all the preparations. Feel included. Right. "How thoughtful," I said, placing my card among the collection of envelopes that probably contained enough money to fund a small country's annual budget. "Is there anything I can help with?" "Oh, how sweet of you to offer," Patricia gushed. "But we have everything well in hand. Professional coordination. You understand. We wouldn't want any mishaps on such an important day. Translation: stay out of the way and let the competent people handle things." I smiled and nodded while mentally reviewing the timeline I'd established with my business managers. Phase 1 had already been completed. Henderson Investment Properties now owned controlling interest in 3 local commercial developments, including the shopping center project that Gordon thought was his retirement nest egg. Phase 2 would be implemented Monday morning when Tyler received the complete documentation of his new business holdings. Phase 3 would unfold over the following weeks as Gordon discovered that his various investments had been systematically purchased by a competitor who was offering his tenants better deals and more flexible lease terms. But first, I had a wedding to attend and a performance to complete. Tyler found me an hour before the ceremony, looking nervous and handsome in his formal wear. The Walsh family had spared no expense on his wedding attire. Custom tuxedo, Italian shoes, gold cufflinks that had probably cost more than he made in a month at his current job. "Mom," he said, giving me a hug that felt just a little desperate, "I'm glad you're here. This whole thing is pretty overwhelming." "You look wonderful, sweetheart," I assured him, straightening his bow tie. "Jessica's a lucky woman." "I hope so," he said quietly. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not good enough for all this, like I don't belong in their world." My heart broke a little bit for my son, who'd been systematically convinced by the Walsh family that he should be grateful for their acceptance rather than confident in his own worth. "Tyler," I said firmly, "you belong anywhere you choose to belong. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." He smiled, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The Walsh family had done a thorough job of making him feel like the poor relation who'd lucked into their golden circle. That was about to change in ways that would surprise everyone, including Tyler. The ceremony was set to begin at 4 o'clock, giving everyone time to complete their preparations and work themselves into the appropriate emotional state for what Patricia kept calling the social event of the season. I spent the afternoon observing the Walsh family dynamics with the clinical interest of someone who'd studied her opponents and found them predictably shallow. Gordon held court with other wealthy guests, discussing business deals and golf games, while Patricia showed off her daughter's elaborate wedding dress to anyone who would listen. Jessica herself was the picture of bridal perfection, floating through the preparations like a princess who'd never doubted that the world would arrange itself around her desires. None of them paid much attention to Tyler's simple small-town mother, sitting quietly in her corner, wearing her modest department store dress, and watching everything with the kind of patient attention that comes from knowing exactly how a story is going to end. At 3:45, I took my designated seat in the front row, family section, naturally, but carefully positioned so that I wouldn't interfere with the photographer's shots of the important relatives. The string quartet began the processional music, and I watched my son take his place at the altar, looking like a man who was about to commit his life to a family that saw him as a charity project rather than an equal partner. That's when Patricia Walsh made the mistake that would cost her family everything they thought they owned. She was standing near the gift table, chatting with her sister about wedding expenses, when she spotted me in my front row seat. I watched her expression change as she took in my modest dress, my simple hairstyle, my complete lack of obvious wealth or social status. And then she said the words that sealed her family's fate, speaking just loud enough for several nearby guests to hear clearly. "Look at that poor thing," Patricia murmured to her sister, nodding in my direction. Sitting there in her little discount dress, trying so hard to look appropriate. "That's not a mother. That's a mistaken address." The words hit me like a physical slap, but what followed was even more revealing. Jessica, overhearing her mother's comment as she approached for her final pre-ceremony photos, actually laughed and clapped her hands together like Patricia had made the most amusing observation. "Mother, you're terrible," Jessica giggled, "but honestly, she does look like she got lost on the way to a church potluck." That's when Tyler, who had been adjusting his boutonniere nearby, went completely still. I watched my son's face change as he processed what his bride and future mother-in-law had just said about his mother. The uncertainty disappeared, replaced by something much harder and more determined than I'd ever seen in his expression. And that's when I knew that maybe, just maybe, I'd raised him right after all. What happened next unfolded like a beautiful, terrible flower blooming in fast motion. Tyler walked away from the altar, his face set in an expression I'd never seen before, and headed straight for the microphone that had been set up for the ceremony readings. The string quartet faltered to a stop as Tyler tapped the microphone, the sound echoing across the elaborately decorated terrace where 200 guests had gathered to witness his wedding. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tyler said, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence, "I need to make an announcement." Jessica, still holding her bouquet and wearing her $15,000 dress, looked confused rather than alarmed, like this was some kind of romantic surprise she hadn't been informed about. "Tyler, darling," she called out, her voice bright with artificial cheer. "What are you doing? The ceremony is supposed to start." He looked at her for a long moment, and I saw something die in his expression. "Jessica," he said into the microphone, "5 minutes ago, I heard you and your mother discussing my mother's appearance. You called her a mistaken address and laughed about how she looked like she got lost on the way to a church potluck. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop on the marble terrace. Jessica's face went white, then red, then white again as she realized that half of Cedar Falls' social elite had just heard her exposed as the petty, cruel person she actually was. "Tyler, that wasn't, we were just," she stammered, but he held up his hand to stop her. "My mother," Tyler continued, his voice getting stronger, "raised me alone after my father died. She worked 2 jobs to put me through college, never complained, never asked for anything in return, and has been nothing but gracious and supportive about this wedding, despite being treated like an unwelcome charity case by your family." Patricia tried to interrupt, rushing toward the microphone, but Tyler stepped away from her reach and kept talking. "I just realized that I can't marry someone who would mock my mother, and I can't join a family that thinks cruelty is entertaining," he said. "So I'm calling off this wedding, right here, right now." The gasp that went up from the assembled guests sounded like a collective intake of breath before a scream. Jessica dropped her bouquet and lunged toward him. "Tyler, you can't be serious. You're ruining everything over a stupid comment?" "I'm serious," he said quietly, removing his boutonniere and setting it on the gift table. "And it wasn't a stupid comment. It was who you really are when you think no one important is listening. That's when Gordon Walsh made his own crucial mistake. He stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment and rage, and pointed a finger at Tyler like he was disciplining a disobedient employee. "You ungrateful little nobody," Gordon snarled. "We've given you everything, a job, a future, acceptance into our family, and this is how you repay us? By humiliating my daughter in front of our friends?" Tyler looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Mr. Walsh," he said, "you've given me a commission-based job that would have made me financially dependent on your goodwill for the rest of my life. That's not generosity. That's control." I felt pride swell in my chest as I watched my son stand up to people who'd spent months making him feel small and grateful for their attention. But Gordon wasn't finished. "Control?" He laughed harshly. "Son, you have no idea what control looks like. You just threw away the best opportunity you'll ever get. You think you can do better than my family? You think your small-town background and your modest little mother are going to open doors for you?" He gestured dismissively in my direction. And that's when I decided it was time to stop being invisible. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my discount dress, and walked toward the microphone with the kind of calm dignity that comes from knowing you hold all the cards in a game other people don't even realize they're playing. "Tyler, sweetheart," I said gently, "would you mind if I said a few words?" He handed me the microphone with a smile that told me he was ready to hear whatever his mother had to say. I looked out at the assembled guests, Cedar Falls' wealthiest families, business leaders, social climbers, and various hangers-on who'd come to witness what they thought would be the social event of the season. "First," I said, "I want to thank the Walsh family for hosting such a educational afternoon. It's been very illuminating to see how certain people behave when they think they have all the power in a situation." Patricia's face was now an alarming shade of purple, while Jessica looked like she was going to faint. "Gordon," I continued, looking directly at him, "you're right that control is important in business relationships. That's why I spent this week purchasing your stake in the Riverside Shopping Center development project." The color drained from Gordon's face like someone had pulled a plug. "What are you talking about?" he whispered. "I'm talking about Henderson Investment Properties," I said pleasantly, "which now owns controlling interest in several local commercial developments, including the one you've been counting on for your retirement funding." I turned to address the crowd, most of whom were staring at me like I'd just announced I was an alien. You see, Patricia was right about one thing. I do have limitations. My limitation is that I don't tolerate people who mistake kindness for weakness or modesty for stupidity. The silence stretched until you could have heard a butterfly land on the roses. "Tyler," I said, handing him back the microphone, "your wedding gift is in my car. I think you'll find it provides better opportunities than anything the Walsh family was offering." And with that, I walked back to my seat and waited for the real show to begin. The aftermath of Tyler's wedding cancellation unfolded like a masterpiece of social destruction, and I had the best seat in the house for every beautiful, chaotic moment. The Walsh family's carefully orchestrated social event had become a public humiliation that would be talked about in Cedar Falls for years to come. Gordon was now following me toward my car, his face flushed with a combination of rage and what I was beginning to recognize as genuine panic. The man who'd spent dinner explaining basic investment principles to the simple widow was apparently beginning to understand that I might know more about business than he'd assumed. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Gordon hissed, catching up to me near the parking area. "You can't just make wild claims about business acquisitions. There are legal consequences for defamation." I unlocked my Honda Civic, the same modest car that had helped maintain my carefully crafted image for the past several months, and retrieved a leather portfolio from the back seat. "Gordon," I said calmly, "I never make claims I can't support with documentation." I opened the portfolio and handed him a stack of papers that I'd been looking forward to sharing for weeks. His hands actually trembled as he read the investment contracts, property transfer agreements, and business incorporation documents that legally established Henderson Investment Properties as a major player in the local commercial real estate market. "This is impossible," he whispered. "These properties, the Riverside project, the medical center development, do you have any idea how much capital this represents?" "Approximately $2.1 million in initial investments," I said helpfully, "with projected returns of roughly $6.8 million over the next 18 months. though I suppose that depends on how current property owners negotiate their exit strategies. The implications hit him like a freight train. Not only had I purchased his stake in several developments, I'd positioned myself to control whether his remaining investments would be profitable or worthless. Tyler had approached during this conversation, still wearing his wedding tuxedo, but looking more confident than I'd seen him in months. "Mom," he said quietly, "what exactly is Henderson Investment Properties?" "It's your wedding gift, sweetheart," I said, handing him a separate folder from my portfolio. "Congratulations, you're now the managing partner of a business that owns more commercial real estate than Gordon's entire empire." Tyler's mouth fell open as he scanned the documents that legally transferred him from Gordon Walsh's potential employee to his business competitor. "I don't understand," Tyler said. "Where did this come from? How did you—" "Honey," I said gently, "your father's life insurance policy was $200,000. I've been investing it for 15 years while everyone assumed I was living on Social Security and church casseroles. Compound interest is a wonderful thing when you're patient and strategic about it." Gordon made a strangled sound that might have been an attempt at speech. "You mean," Tyler said slowly, "you've been pretending to be poor this whole time?" "Not pretending to be poor," I corrected. "Living modestly while building wealth quietly. There's a difference between having money and showing off money, though some people never learn that distinction." I looked meaningfully at Gordon, who was still clutching the business documents like they might disappear if he let go. "The beautiful thing about real estate investment," I continued conversationally, "is that it's not just about buying properties. It's about understanding market timing, development potential, and strategic positioning. For instance, did you know that the medical center development is expanding faster than originally projected?" Gordon's face went ashen. "What does that mean?" "It means they need more commercial space than they initially calculated. They're actively looking to buy out smaller investors at premium rates to accelerate their development timeline." I smiled, the kind of smile that probably wasn't very grandmotherly. Of course, Henderson Investment Properties is in a position to negotiate those buyout terms on behalf of all current investors. Being the majority stakeholder does have its advantages. That's when the full scope of Gordon's situation became clear to him. Not only had I bought his stake in the developments, I was now in position to control the sale terms that would determine whether his remaining investments made him money or cost him everything. "What do you want?" he asked, and for the first time, his voice held none of the condescending superiority I'd been hearing for months. "Want?" I laughed. "Gordon, I don't want anything from you. I never did. You and your family assumed I needed your acceptance, your financial opportunities, your social approval. But the truth is, I was perfectly happy before Jessica decided Tyler needed to be elevated to Walsh family standards." Tyler was reading through his business documents with an expression of growing amazement and pride. "Mom," he said, "this is incredible. But why didn't you tell me? Why did you let the Walsh family treat you like a poor relative they were generously tolerating?" I finished. "Because, sweetheart, sometimes the best way to deal with people who judge others by their bank accounts is to let them reveal exactly who they are when they think they have all the power." That's when Patricia Walsh appeared at Gordon's shoulder, having finally worked up the courage to follow her husband's confrontation with the woman she'd called a mistake in a dress. "Margaret," she said, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining politeness, "surely we can discuss this situation like reasonable adults. There's been a misunderstanding." "Has there?" I asked. "What exactly was I misunderstanding when you explained my limitations to me? Or when you suggested I might need senior living assistance? Or when you told me I wasn't appropriate to be a grandmother to Tyler and Jessica's future children?" Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it again without speaking. "The only misunderstanding," I continued, "was your assumption that modest meant powerless and quiet meant stupid." I gathered my papers and closed the portfolio with a satisfying snap. "Tyler," I said, "your business managers will contact you Monday morning to walk you through your new responsibilities as managing partner. I think you'll find the position offers better advancement opportunities than anything the Walsh family had planned for you." As Tyler and I walked back toward my Honda Civic, I could hear Gordon and Patricia having what appeared to be an urgent, whispered argument about damage control and financial implications. But the real consequences of their assumptions were just beginning to unfold. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything seem possible, and I was sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and the Cedar Falls Gazette when my phone started ringing. The first call came at 7:43 a.m., and by 8:15, I'd fielded 6 different conversations with reporters, business associates, and what appeared to be half the local social circle wanting to know if the rumors about the Henderson investment empire were actually true. The 7th call was from Tyler, and his voice contained a mixture of excitement and bewilderment that made me smile. "Mom, I just left the meeting with the business managers," he said. "This is insane. Do you realize what you've built?" "I have some idea," I said modestly, though I was feeling quite proud of 15 years' worth of careful financial planning. Henderson Investment Properties doesn't just own the properties you told Gordon about. There are office buildings, retail spaces, development projects. "Mom, this company is worth almost $4 million. $4.2 million as of last Friday's valuation," I corrected, though that should increase substantially once the medical center expansion is completed. "I can't believe you've been sitting in this house, making casseroles for church potlucks while secretly running a real estate empire." "I wasn't running an empire, sweetheart. I was building your future. There's a difference." The 8th call came while Tyler and I were still talking, and I recognized Gordon Walsh's number on my caller ID. "Tyler, I need to take this call," I said. "Why don't you come over for lunch and we can discuss your new business responsibilities?" I answered Gordon's call with what I hoped was appropriate politeness. "Good morning, Gordon. How can I help you?" "Margaret." His voice was strained, like he'd been awake all night. "We need to talk. Can you meet me at my office this morning?" "I'm sorry, but I have a very full day planned," I said truthfully. Between reporters calling for interviews and Tyler's business orientation, my schedule was completely booked. "This is about the Riverside development," Gordon said urgently. "There are things you don't understand about the legal implications of your acquisitions, such as the environmental impact studies that haven't been completed yet, such as the zoning restrictions that could delay the project by years, such as the financial liabilities you've just inherited by buying into these properties." I sipped my coffee and waited for him to continue. "Margaret, I'm trying to help you here. These investments aren't as secure as you think they are. There are risks involved that could cost you everything." "How thoughtful of you to be concerned about my financial security," I said. "Just like you were concerned about my ability to handle home ownership when you suggested I move to senior living. That's not what this is about, isn't it? Gordon, you spent months treating me like a confused old woman who needed your family's guidance and protection. Now that you've discovered I understand business better than you assumed, suddenly you're worried about my financial well-being?" The silence stretched long enough for me to take another sip of coffee. "What do you want, Margaret?" Gordon finally asked, his voice defeated. "I want you to stop treating people like they're disposable based on your assumptions about their bank accounts," I said. "I want your wife to think twice before she calls someone a mistake in a dress at their son's wedding. And I want Jessica to understand that cruelty has consequences. And if the family apologizes, if we try to make things right with Tyler..." "Gordon," I said gently, "Tyler called off his wedding yesterday because he finally saw who your family really is when you think no one important is watching. An apology isn't going to change that reality. So what happens now?" I looked out my kitchen window at the modest house and tidy garden that had camouflaged one of the most successful investment strategies in Cedar Falls history. "Now you learn to compete with Henderson Investment Properties in the local commercial real estate market," I said. "I hear competition is good for business. Margaret, please, we can work something out. Some kind of partnership arrangement. Our families don't have to be enemies." "We're not enemies, Gordon. Enemies would require me to consider your family important enough to actively oppose. What we are is competitors." I heard him take a shaky breath. "The Riverside project," he said. "The medical center buyout. You could make millions from those deals." "Yes, I could. Tyler will actually, since he's the managing partner. And my stake in those projects will be worth whatever Henderson Investment Properties decides to offer when we negotiate the consolidated sale to the medical center. Market rates, of course, though market rates can vary significantly depending on how motivated sellers are. The implications hung in the air between us like a sword suspended by a thread. "How motivated do I need to be?" Gordon asked quietly. That's when I realized he still didn't understand what had actually happened. He thought this was about money, about business negotiations and profit margins. He thought I'd built a real estate empire to compete with his wealth. Gordon, I said, this was never about your money. This was about respect. Your family spent months making Tyler feel like he should be grateful for your acceptance. Like he wasn't good enough for your daughter, like I wasn't appropriate to be in your social circle. But we welcomed Tyler into the family. You offered him a commission-based job that would have made him financially dependent on your continued goodwill. You planned to control his future by controlling his income. That's not. Yes, it is. And when you discovered that Tyler's mother wasn't the poor widow you assumed, your first instinct was to threaten me with legal consequences and try to manipulate me with warnings about financial risks. I finished my coffee and set the cup down with a soft clink. The difference between us, Gordon, is that I spent 15 years building wealth to create opportunities for my son. You spent years using your wealth to control other people. Margaret, wait. Tyler is picking up his new company car this afternoon, I continued. Henderson Investment Properties provides its managing partner with appropriate transportation for business meetings. I believe he's selected something German and expensive. I could hear Gordon breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Oh, and Gordon. Patricia might want to start looking for a new venue for her charity luncheon next month. The country club lease is up for renewal, and Henderson Investment Properties just purchased the land their building sits on. I hung up before he could respond, feeling more satisfied than I'd felt in months. Phase 3 of Project Education was proceeding exactly as planned. 3 months later, I was sitting in the executive conference room of Henderson Investment Properties, watching Tyler conduct a business meeting with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you own the building you're sitting in. The offices were modest but professional. I'd insisted on tasteful rather than ostentatious, because the Walsh family had taught me the difference between having power and needing to display it. The medical center expansion is ahead of schedule, Tyler was explaining to our development partners. We should be ready for the final property consolidation by early spring, which puts us roughly 6 months ahead of our initial timeline. Our lead contractor nodded approvingly. The Henderson Group's approach to project management has been impressive. Having all the properties under unified ownership eliminated most of the coordination problems we usually face with multiple stakeholders. I smiled from my seat at the back of the conference room. The Henderson Group, Tyler's idea for branding our various business holdings, had grown beyond even my initial projections. What had started as my revenge against the Walsh family's condescension had evolved into a legitimate business empire that was transforming commercial development in our area. Mrs. Henderson, the contractor continued, your initial vision for coordinated development has saved us approximately 18 months of negotiation and permitting delays. The efficiency gains alone have increased the project's profitability by roughly 30%. Thank you, I said, though Tyler deserves the credit for implementation. I'm just the founding investor, which was true, though it didn't capture the full satisfaction of watching my son grow into a businessman who could buy and sell Gordon Walsh's empire twice over. After the meeting ended and our partners left, Tyler and I sat in his office reviewing the quarterly financial reports that showed Henderson Investment Properties was now worth approximately $7.8 million and growing. Mom, Tyler said, I still can't believe you planned all this while letting everyone think you were just the modest widow making casseroles. The casseroles were real, I pointed out. I do actually enjoy cooking for church events. But the rest of it? The 15 years of investment planning? The business strategy? The timing of the Walsh family takedown? You orchestrated all of it? Not all of it. Jessica's cruelty was entirely her own contribution to the situation. Tyler leaned back in his executive chair, a much nicer piece of furniture than anything Gordon Walsh had in his downsized office space across town. Speaking of Jessica, he said, I heard she and her mother moved to Patricia's sister's house in Des Moines. Apparently, the Walsh family finances were more precarious than anyone realized. I made sympathetic noises, though I wasn't particularly surprised. When Henderson Investment Properties had bought out Gordon's stakes in various developments, we'd paid fair market value, but fair market value for a motivated seller facing potential bankruptcy was considerably lower than what Gordon had probably hoped to receive. And Gordon? Still running the car dealerships, but I heard he had to sell the estate. They're renting something much smaller now. Tyler paused. Do you ever feel bad about how things worked out for them? I considered the question seriously. Did I feel bad that the Walsh family had lost their social status, their financial security, and their sense of superiority over other people? I feel bad that they chose to treat people with cruelty and condescension, I said. The financial consequences were their own choices. I simply gave them the opportunity to compete in a market where their assumptions about other people's capabilities turned out to be wrong. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you ever remarry? With your intelligence, your financial acumen, your ability to build all this, you could have had any life you wanted. The question caught me off guard because it touched on something I rarely allowed myself to think about. Tyler, I had the life I wanted. I had you. I had meaningful work. I had financial security and the freedom to make my own choices. Not everyone needs a partner to feel complete. But weren't you lonely? Sometimes, I admitted. But loneliness is temporary. Self-respect is permanent. I'd rather be lonely than settle for someone who didn't value what I had to offer. Tyler smiled. Like the Walsh family didn't value what our family had to offer? Exactly like that. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see a note from my real estate agent. The small house I'd been quietly considering, a charming cottage near the lake with a garden perfect for someone who'd earned the right to slow down and enjoy life, had just had its offer accepted. Tyler, I said, I have some news. I'm thinking about selling the house and buying something smaller. Really? Are you sure? That house has so many memories. Good memories, I agreed. But I think it's time to make some new ones. The cottage I'm buying has a guest house that's perfect for visiting grandchildren. Grandchildren? Tyler's eyebrows shot up. Mom, I just called off my wedding 3 months ago. I know, but you're young, successful, and now you own enough property to be very attractive to the right kind of woman. The right kind of woman? The kind who likes you for who you are, rather than who she thinks she can make you become. Tyler laughed. Any other wisdom from the secret millionaire who spent 15 years pretending to be poor? I stood up and smoothed down my dress, a much nicer one than I'd worn to the Walsh family rehearsal dinner, though still nothing flashy. Just this, I said. Never let anyone convince you that kindness is weakness, modesty is stupidity, or quiet strength is the same as powerlessness. And always remember that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so successful that their opinions become irrelevant. Is that what this was? Revenge? No, sweetheart. This was justice. Revenge would have been cruel. Justice is simply allowing people to experience the consequences of their own choices. Tyler walked me to my new car, a sensible but comfortable sedan that reflected my actual financial position rather than the image I'd been maintaining, and gave me a hug that felt like coming home. Thank you, Mom, for all of it. For raising me right, for protecting me from people who would have used me, and for teaching me that real power comes from building something meaningful rather than just having money. As I drove home through the streets of Cedar Falls, I passed the Walsh family estate, which now had a for sale sign on its front lawn and an air of abandoned grandeur that would have made me sad if I didn't remember Patricia's comment about mistakes in dresses. Sometimes people create their own consequences, and the kindest thing you can do is step aside and let those consequences unfold naturally. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, thinking about the journey from that condescending dinner party to today's successful business meeting. 15 years of careful planning, months of strategic patience, and one beautifully timed revelation had transformed not just my son's future, but our entire family's legacy. Margaret Henderson had started this story as a widow, pretending to be poor. She was ending it as a businesswoman who'd proven that underestimating quiet strength was the most expensive mistake the Walsh family had ever made. And honestly, that felt like exactly the right ending. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.